Hello everyone. In today's class, we are going to do environmental issues. And our part 5 is radioactive waste. So as we have been talking about different types of waste like the air pollution, right? Water pollution, soil pollution, there is radioactive pollution also. Right? Which is caused by the radioactive waste. So like we have studied in the previous part about the solid waste which contains all the particles, different types of particles, the pollutants are there and how to dispose them. So today's class we are going to talk about the radioactive waste. But what actually is radioactivity? Radioactivity is the property of certain elements like uranium, thorium and radium. So they emit the radioactive rays or the particles due to disintegration of the atomic nuclei. Right? So when we are talking about this uranium, thorium and radium, right? Like uranium is 235, radium is 224 atomic number, and for example, we have carbon, right? Carbon 14. Yes, so it can be used with radioactivity. So radioactivity is the property of certain elements, right? So energy of the atomic nucleus is the nuclear energy and the splitting of the atomic nuclei is nuclear fission, right? So if the nuclei is splitting, fission means splitting. And nuclear fusion means combining, right? There are two main sources of radiation. One is natural and one is man-made. So it includes the radiations from the natural sources, like there are rays, cosmic rays, which are coming from the outer space, like uranium 235, radium 224, carbon 14, etc. And we have man-made. It includes the mining of the radioactive elements. That means we are mining it, we are digging into the earth near nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. Production of radioactive isotopes are there which are releasing the harmful radiations, and that is all by the human activity. That is human made. So let's talk about the nuclear power plants. So the nuclear fuel cycle, it covers the process of production of nuclear power starting from the mining. So there's a nuclear power which is being produced by mining and processing of uranium, right? And that leads to the disposal of the radioactive waste. Nuclear fuel and also the coolant used in the nuclear power plant produces large amount of pollution. So the nuclear fuel and also the coolant which can be used to cool down the hot temperature used in the nuclear power plant produces large amount of pollution in the environment. Let's talk about the effects of these. One is uranium mines and mills which produce the radioactive waste material that can pollute the environment. The processes of uranium enrichment and fabrication of the fuel assemblies produce radioactive waste. So like how the uranium, the natural uranium is produced when the mining processes, right? So all the accidents of the meltdowns in the nuclear reactors from the nuclear power plant can release the harmful radiations into the environment, right? So transport of the radioactive material to the nuclear reactor and of the nuclear waste to disposable site can pose hazard, right, due to the emission of the radiations. So the machinery of the nuclear power plant that becomes radioactive due to the exposure of the radiations is also the nuclear waste. So we can say machine is also the nuclear waste, right? Let's talk about the nuclear weapons. So when we're talking about the nuclear weapons, nuclear fallout is there. What is nuclear fallout? That is settling down of the radioactive particles. So settling down of the radioactive particles from the air on the land is known as the nuclear fallout, right? So from the soil they are absorbed by the plants, they reach the animals and finally to the humans via the food chain, and that leads to the transfer of the nuclear elements through the food chain to all the organism. So the explosion of the nuclear weapon contains uranium-235, plutonium-239. It produces, when there is breaking up, that nuclear fission is there, it forms strontium-90, cesium-137, iodine-131. So from here there comes the question that explosion of the nuclear weapons, it contains uranium-235 and plutonium-239, produces to strontium, cesium and iodine, right? So there are effects of it also, right? So these have wide spectrum of effect, from the mental retardation, right? As this cause, they are very harmful, they are very toxic in nature, these are the radioactive waves, right? They can cause a physical disability and even cause death. So by entering the normal pathway of the mineral cycling and ecological food chain, these radioisotopes, that is the isotopes of the chemical, right? So the radioisotope means isotope of a chemical element that continuously undergoes the radioactive decay. Radioactive decay means radioactivity is decreasing or fission is happening. Like iodine-131, it can reach the human body through the food chain, right? From the organism to us, and we eat it, that leads to the food chain. It damages the bone marrow cells, white blood cells which are fighting, lymph nodes, spleen, primary lymphoid organ, and it causes skin cancer. So it releases B cells, T cells are there, right? Second is strontium. Strontium-90, it causes the bone cancer, right? So when this is released, the strontium-90 causes bone cancer. How to control the radioactive pollutant? There are following steps which can be taken to control the radioactive pollution. First, so what are the causes? We can look on the causes, we can control the causes of pollution, like care should be taken to prevent the leakage, right? So for example, there's a transfer of the radioactive material, so there should be proper covering of it, there should not be any leakage of the radioactive radiations from the nuclear reactors, and regular inspection for the level should be done. Radioactive waste should be disposed of properly by taking all the safety measures into consideration, right? The workers should use the headgears, like it should be covered completely, protective clothing should be there, right? Like the doctors which are using in the coronavirus, right? So they should also use the workers working in the with the radioactive pollution or the pollutants to avoid the exposure to radiations. Policies should be framed to avoid the production and use of nuclear weapons. So instead of the nuclear weapons, some other weapons with some which has less radioactivity or which does not have the radioactivity can be used. So if we look at this, is a transport container for the nuclear waste. So for example, this transport container is leaked, right? There's a leakage, so all the nuclear waste is released and it can cause death, because these rays, this radioactive material, they are very, very harmful, right? So these radiation that is given off by the nuclear waste is exceedingly damaging the biological organism, because it can cause mutations also. That means some change in the genes or alteration in the genes, which can lead to the abnormal individual, or it can cause a mental retardation. So this is about the radioactive waste. So about the control of the radioactive pollution, right? It can be exposure to the radiations. There are two types of radiations, like the non-ionizing radiations and the ionizing radiations. about the isotopes and the nuclear weapons. Right? I hope you understood. Thank you.